Imagine boarding a luxury jet only to have your innocence torn apart, literally. 4-year-old Owen Sinclair clutches a handmade sketch for his CEO father, believing first class is his rightful kingdom. But when a single adult's cruelty rips that paper in two, what happens to a child's faith in kindness? Who will stand up when the rules hurt the most vulnerable? And how far would a father go when he discovers his own company code weaponized against his son? Set aboard the sleek Azure Skies Airbus A350. This is more than an in-flight drama. It's a test of corporate power, personal resolve, and the quiet voice that refuses to stay silent. Will a CEO's clear deck protocol save the day? Can compassion mend broken trust at 30,000 feet? And when every watchful eye in first class turns away, who will speak for the smallest passengers? Join us as we unravel each emotional twist from the tear-strewn aisles of executive class to the hush of accountability echoing through every seatback monitor. Hit like, share with a friend who needs to hear this, and subscribe now so you don't miss a single moment of justice taking flight. The dawn light poured in like liquid gold through the towering glass facade of Evergreen Bay Airport, illuminating the polished floors and echoing halls. 4-year-old Owen Sinclair felt his heart beat faster as he clasped Ms. Harper's hand. His small legs bounced in excitement as he caught sight of their jet, the sleek white fuselage of Azure Skies Charter gleaming at Gate B-12. To Owen, this wasn't just any flight, it was the adventure of a lifetime. Today, he would travel in A350 Premier Suite, the very cabin he had only glimpsed in the framed photographs lining the walls of the Azure Lounge. He imagined sinking into the plush cream leather, propping his feet on a fold-out ottoman, and sampling fanciful treats from a rolling dessert cart. "Ready to show Daddy your masterpiece, Ms.?" Harper asked with a gentle smile. She knelt so they were eye to eye, smoothing the edges of the crayon drawing clutched in Owen's free hand. The sketch, a plane soaring high above a sea of puffy clouds, was perfect in his proud eyes. "Happy travels, Daddy," someone had written beneath it. Owen nodded solemnly, as if this little sheet of paper carried the weight of his mission. His father, Julian Sinclair, CEO of Azure Skies Airlines, would not join them on this flight. Board meetings awaited him back at headquarters, but Owen's world knew why this journey mattered tonight. In Emerald Cove, Julian Sinclair would receive an award for CEO of the Year. Owen's drawing and his hug delivered on his behalf by Ms. Harper were tokens of a love more precious than any trophy. They stepped onto the jet bridge and into the hush of A350 Premier Suite. Sky blue carpeting, gleaming wood accents, and soft overhead lights combined to make the cabin feel like a floating palace. Owen's eyes widened at the row of suites before him. A crisp, navy uniformed attendant offered a curt nod but no welcome. Her gaze was cool, her posture impeccable, a human statue of professionalism. Owen hesitated. "Miss..." Harper squeezed his hand reassuringly. With a deep breath, he toddled forward, his anticipation renewed as he spotted his suite. There, it was a wide cream leather seat, an ottoman nestled beneath, a plush blue blanket folded across the headrest, and a pillow monogrammed with the Azure Skies logo. He pictured himself reclining, pressing a button to watch cartoons high above the clouds. He set his precious drawing on the side table. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Then the attendant cleared her throat. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice stripped of warmth, "but children under 6 are not allowed in this cabin. Please proceed to executive class." Owen froze. Flames of confusion and hurt flared in his chest as tears welled in his big blue eyes. "But this is where Daddy wants me," he whispered, pointing at the sketch. "Ms." Harper stepped forward. "He's under special care," she said in a calm, low tone. "He has a condition that needs a quieter environment." The attendant's lips curved into a thin, skeptical smile. "Company policy and safety regulations are clear. Right this way." She gestured toward the staircase leading to executive class. Owen shook his head, clutching his drawing as though it could shield him from the injustice. He murmured, "I'm sorry," as if the world had punished him for daring to belong. "Ms." Harper scooped him up. "It's okay, sweetheart," she cooed. "I'll find you a nice seat. Daddy will love your picture." But Owen only cast one last longing glance at the now empty suite. His small fingers inched forward to retrieve the drawing, fluttering on the floor. Each time he reached out, the attendant flicked it away, her movements precise, almost rehearsed. Owen's tears began to fall, slow and quiet, as he crawled for the paper. "Please," he breathed, voice trembling. "It's for Daddy." Suddenly, the attendant's annoyance hardened into cruelty. She stepped close, snatched the drawing from Owen's grasp, and in one swift motion ripped the paper in two. The tear cut through color and hope alike. Owen yelped a sound that echoed like a heartbreak in that pristine cabin. Silence enveloped them. Owen stared at the torn halves drifting to the carpet, his tiny mouth agape. Why, he choked out before a sob escaped. The attendant said nothing, standing with arms crossed as though she had served justice on errant children everywhere. No one intervened. Passengers bowed their heads or turned away. Owen huddled against Ms. Harper, clutching the jagged edges of his artwork, tears falling like raindrops on the torn paper. In that moment, Azure Skies, Airline's own ethos that no barrier should stand between a child and his innocence, lay in tatters under the incandescent cabin lights. Ms. Harper gently lowered Owen into a seat in executive class, but the cushion felt cold, inadequate. Owen pressed the torn paper to his cheek and closed his eyes against the harsh glare. His mind whispered one plea. "Daddy, come fix this." Far above the Pacific, the plane's engines droned on, and in the hush of executive class, beneath the indifferent hum of other passengers, a small boy realized that sometimes the world's rules were neither kind nor fair, and that good people must often fight harder to make things right. The cabin lights glowed a gentle amber as the Azure Skies Airbus A350 lifted off, its twin engines humming a soft lullaby. 4-year-old Owen Sinclair sat cradled in executive class, clutching the two jagged halves of his sketch to his chest. He barely had time to register the brutal tear before the cabin door slid closed and the jet rolled toward the runway. Somewhere, just beyond the velvet curtain, lay A350 Premier Suite. Now empty of its elegant cream leather and fluffy blankets, empty except for Charlotte Blake, who had retreated silently behind that barrier, arms folded and expression frozen. Owen could not see her, but he felt her cold disapproval seeping through the fabric curtain like a draft. Ms. Harper guided Owen to a wide leather seat, tucking the soft blue blanket around his small shoulders. "We'll be safe here, sweetheart," she murmured, brushing a tear from his cheek. Still, her eyes darted anxiously to the curtain, worry etched in every line of her face. Owen pressed his cheek into the plush headrest, his heart pounding louder than the engines. He remembered her soft reassurance. "He's under special care, ma'am." But the attendant had ignored it and ripped his drawing in two. The only gift Owen had for his father. Behind the curtain, the same clipped voice sliced through the quiet. "I've escorted all children under 6 to executive class today. Do not question me. It was a decree, not a request." Owen curled tighter under his blanket, wishing he could vanish. Business class attendants drifted by with polite, distant smiles. One paused with a tray of juice boxes, her eyebrows rising in sympathetic pity at Owen's red-rimmed eyes. "Would you like some apple juice?" she offered gently. Owen shook his head and pressed the torn paper against his heart. "Ms." Harper cleared her throat. "Let's get you settled," she said firmly. "Maybe draw another picture." She produced a fresh sketchbook, its blank pages promising a new start. But Owen could only stare at the empty white sheet, imagining Charlotte Blake's scissors poised to strike again. "No," he whispered. "Not right now." He traced the contour of the little green bracelet on his wrist, Julian Sinclair's gift. A promise of safety. His father's calm voice echoed in his mind that bracelet will always keep you safe. But in that moment, even its steady hum felt powerless. Minutes passed in heavy silence. Other passengers bent over novels or screens, glancing occasionally at the small boy whose tears never stopped. A kind woman across the aisle patted his knee. "Hang in there, kiddo," she murmured. Owen managed a tiny nod but felt no comfort. "Ms." Harper cracked open the window shade. The crystal sea glittered in the morning sun, waves dancing like diamonds. Owen pressed his palm against the cool glass, imagining a world where nothing could hurt him. For a fleeting second, his sorrow eased until a clear, authoritative voice thundered from behind the curtain. "Hello, this is Julian Sinclair, CEO of Azure Skies Airlines. We apologize for the treatment of our youngest passenger. This flight will be grounded upon arrival for a full investigation. Thank you for your patience as we ensure everyone's safety, especially our littlest travelers." A collective gasp rippled through executive class. Owen's heart leapt as he looked at Ms. Harper, whose hand shook as she reached for his. "We will be in touch. Justice will be served." The announcement continued. Heat and relief flooded Owen's chest. His father had not forgotten him. Ms. Harper scooped him into her arms as fellow passengers murmured in approval. Soon, a flight attendant arrived with a plate of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies courtesy of Mr. Sinclair himself. Owen sniffed their sweet aroma, a small smile at last breaking through his tears, as he nibbled a warm cookie nestled against Ms. Harper. The cabin's warmth and his father's steady voice wove a quiet comfort around him, mending his wounded heart. The afterglow of Julian Sinclair's broadcast still lingered in executive class when Charlotte Blake emerged from behind the velvet curtain. She paused just beyond the barrier that separated A350 Premier Suite from executive class. Arms crossed over her navy blazer, her posture was impeccable. Hair arranged in a flawless chignon, pearls catching the soft cabin light, heels sounding a precise click on the plush carpet. To Charlotte, this was no mere flight, it was her stage, and every passenger and actor obliged to follow her script of deference. Owen Sinclair, tucked into his wide leather seat, stared at the curtain with trembling fingers holding the torn fragments of his drawing. Behind those folds lay the domain Charlotte zealously protected. She imagined the hush of cream leather suites, the gentle chime of crystal water goblets, and the hush of whispered orders. Children like Owen posed the greatest threat to that carefully curated calm, unpredictable, messy, small. A soft chime at her hip summoned Charlotte's attention. Her in-ear earpiece crackled with the galley's calm voice. She offered a crisp nod and stepped forward to greet a distinguished couple lounging in seats 1A and 1B. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett. Your caviar service will commence momentarily. May I collect your menus?" Her tone was warm, honeyed a flawless performance for the right audience. But as soon as her back turned, her gaze flicked to the curtain's edge. There, in muted light, Owen Sinclair sat clutching torn artwork and wearing a bracelet that could disrupt her ecosystem. In Charlotte's mind, the child had no business in first class or anywhere near it. He belonged in family class, or better yet, kept safely on the ground in a playroom designed for chaos. She advanced down the aisle with practiced grace, greeting passengers whose names she barely knew. Yet each step brought her attention back to that curtain, as though sheer force of will could banish the small boy beyond it. She paused by the minibar station, adjusting a row of crystal flutes until they formed a perfect terrace. When a soft bang echoed from the galley, a tray fell, and Charlotte tensed disorder, however slight, was intolerable. Her mind replayed the morning's events, the child toddling into first class with unearned confidence, the crush of delight on his face. It had felt disrespectful when Miss Harper had carted him off to executive class, undermining Charlotte's authority. Worse still, he'd apologized in a tremulous whisper. "I'm sorry," mocking her devotion to protocol. She had watched every moment, a cold irritation coiling in her chest. Now, retrieving her service tablet, she scrolled through the flight manifest until Owen Sinclair's name appeared flagged under VIP child exception. Her lips curved into a contemptuous smirk. If anyone deserved first-class comfort, it was her perfect track record, her top-of-the-class training. Yet here sat a 4-year-old who owed his seat to a surname, not merit. Protocol may preach discretion, but it did not demand tolerance. Arms crossed once more. Charlotte leaned against the polished bulkhead, surveying executive class as if it were a laboratory. She watched couples marking charts on their entertainment screens, the low hum of hushed conversations swirling around her. To them, she was invisible, simply an attendant, but she knew they were potential threats to her sanctuary. Any one of them might recognize the injustice and challenge her. A soft ding signaled the pilot's announcement. Flight 4606 had reached cruising altitude and service would begin in 5 minutes. Charlotte straightened her shoulders, brushed imaginary lint from her sleeve, and readied herself. This was her shining moment. Truffles, smoked salmon, the works, delivered with a flourish that could melt the hardest hearts. In a voice measured like a metronome, she addressed the cabin ladies and gentlemen. "Welcome to first-class service. May I offer you a glass of Azure Brut, or perhaps a specially curated cappuccino?" A ripple of appreciative smiles confirmed her triumph. She thrived on that affirmation, but beneath her satisfaction lay a dark undercurrent, the unspoken bond of adult privilege versus child vulnerability. From her vantage point, she caught the eye of a businessman across the aisle. He acknowledged her with a slight nod, gratitude gleaming in his eyes. In that exchange, Charlotte and he solidified their unspoken hierarchy pedigree over poverty, adult over child. As long as they upheld the unwritten rules, order would reign. Moments later, the Steele family settled into their suite, laying out lobster bisque in hand-blown bowls, artisan bread brushed with garlic butter. A champagne cork popped, and sunlight burst through the cabin door. Charlotte allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. This was her realm, a realm she would defend by protocol alone. Far behind her, Owen Sinclair peeked around the curtain, hugging his drawing fragments close. His heart fluttered, hoping his father's voice might return. Yet here, in the bright glow of first class, Charlotte marshaled every ounce of her training to keep him at bay. In her mind, clemency and compromise were sins. As the azure skies Airbus A350 hummed steadily, service continued flawlessly. Plates arrived with precise timing. Glassware glinted in the soft light. No one dared cross the boundary she maintained. Yet, with each passing moment, she felt the tension tighten in a quiet pressure emanating from the curtain's hidden side. She replayed Owen's trembling apology once more. "I'm sorry." It rang in her mind like an unwelcome motif, a challenge to her authority. Why should the world bend for someone too young to grasp courtesy? She adjusted her blazer and marched back toward the curtain, steeling herself for any disruption. In a single, disciplined motion, she tucked her tablet away and resumed her rounds. Each passenger received her full attention until she caught sight of Ms. Harper hovering near Owen's seat, her protective gaze unmistakable. That look fueled Charlotte's fury, for here was a grown woman shielding childlike vulnerability instead of enforcing order. The cabin's soft lighting seemed to spotlight her every action as she glazed over champagne flutes, brushed crumb from a passenger's sleeve, and offered gentle smiles. Yet behind each gesture lay a steely resolve, no disorder, no exceptions. Even the faintest echo of chaos would be snuffed out. Inside, Owen drew his knees to his chest, trembling beneath the blanket. He pressed the broken paper to his cheek, tears glistening at the corners of his eyes. To him, the world had grown unkind in that elegant cabin. But somewhere beyond the curtain, a whisper of justice lingered, a promise he clung to in his heart. And as Charlotte Blake patrolled her domain with the precision of a watchmaker, the small child waited, hoping that the quiet storm his father had unleashed would cross the barrier and shatter her fortress of protocol. For courage, he had learned, was not always loud. It could arrive on a whisper, a sweet gesture, or a steadfast voice broadcasting across the sky. Yet here, in the face of Charlotte's unwavering order, courage would need to roar. But all Owen Sinclair saw was Charlotte Blake's heels vanishing behind a porcelain tray of hors d'oeuvres. He pressed a trembling hand to his chest, as if searching for the steady pulse of his little green bracelet, a promise of protection that also reminded him he truly did not belong there. Charlotte Blake paused at the velvet curtain's edge, straightened her cap, then drifted toward the exit with the practiced grace of someone who had just triumphed. In her mind, she had done her duty. She had protected first class from the chaos of childhood. When the flight landed, she knew she would receive her bonus for maintaining impeccable service records. But before then, she would flag that VIP child exception in the manifest. Names like Sinclair would be scrutinized from now on. No more special cases. No more drawing-doting toddlers stepping into the galley. She ran her hand along the cold stainless steel countertop, feeling its ruthless efficiency, unseen by her beyond the curtain. Owen Sinclair sat curled in his seat, knees tucked under his chin and the torn halves of his drawing pressed tight to his heart. Tears filled his wide eyes, but these were not tears of fear. somewhere deep inside him, a tiny ember of resolve began to glow nothing. Not even the Ice Queen of first class could steal his belief in kindness. High above the crystal sea, the azure sky's Airbus A350 carved a silent path through the clouds. Inside, some passengers remained blind to the cruelty they had witnessed. Others seemed ready to rise against it. As the cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber glow, a hush settled over executive class. Owen Sinclair hugged the torn paper close, feeling the rough edges bite into his fingertips. He did not know where Ms. Harper had gone, nor why the adults' faces looked so strained, but he knew one truth: he felt utterly, painfully small. As the curtain parted once more, Charlotte Blake re-emerged, the picture of composure in her navy blazer and heels that clicked like a metronome. She carried herself with regal authority, as if this cabin were her court and Owen its only subject. "Excuse me, young man," she said, her voice low and rehearsed. Owen flinched, glancing down at her polished black shoes, then up at the unreadable mask on her face. With a swift motion, Charlotte yanked the small backpack from the seat beside him, sending a wooden toy plane skittering across the carpet. "What's this? You think you're some kind of VIP?" she sneered, kicking the toy under a nearby ottoman. Owen's lower lip quivered. "It's my plane," he whispered, voice quaking. "I drew it for Daddy." Charlotte Blake's lips curled into a disdainful smirk. "Your drawings are pathetic." She snatched the torn fragments from Owen's lap and waved them mockingly at the surrounding passengers. "Look at this ripped like yesterday's newspaper. You kids and your scribbles." A few onlookers shifted uneasily, but no one spoke up. An elderly man shrugged at his wife. A businessman yawned theatrically, pulling a scarf over his mouth. Civility rules abounded in executive class, yet none compelled them to defend a frightened child. Owen's small voice trembled. Please give it back." He reached out, fingertips grazing the corner of the paper. Instead, Charlotte tugged the drawing again with vicious force, creating a fresh tear that scattered pastel confetti across the floor. "Let's see you fix that. Picasso," she taunted. "Or is that too much to ask?" The cabin fell into a heavy, oppressive silence. Ms. Harper hurried forward, cheeks flushed with indignation. "Ms. Blake, please," she began urgently. Charlotte cut her off with a sharp glance. "Save it. Company policy is the law. No exceptions." She turned back to Owen, leaning in close enough for her breath to chill his ear. Then, with alarming force, she cuffed him on the shoulder. "Sit still, or you'll be escorted off at the next stop." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. A young executive across the aisle closed his laptop and leaned forward, eyes flicking between Charlotte Blake and the quivering child. But then he shrugged and leaned back, reminded by some unwritten code that one must not interfere. Owen bit his lip so hard he tasted blood, tiny hands clutching the seat fabric as he stifled a scream. The overhead lights seemed unbearably bright and cold. Charlotte surveyed her handiwork with detached satisfaction. "Better," she murmured, as though expecting applause. When none came, she shrugged and continued down the aisle, heels clicking in triumphant rhythm. In the hushed aftermath, executive class passengers exchanged uneasy glances. Some averted their eyes, others stared at the curtain dividing them from the glittering calm of first class. Owen remained frozen, tears finally slipping in great, sobbing streams. A gentle hand landed on his back. Harper's arm, soft and protective. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," she whispered, drawing him into a hug. "I'll get you a fresh sheet of paper, I promise." Owen shook his head against her sleeve. "Daddy won't care that I ruined everything. He cares more than anything, Ms. Harper assured him, stroking his hair and shielding him from the cold stares from the galley. Another attendant peered out, concern written across her face. "Is everything all right here?" she asked softly. "We're fine now." "Thank you, Ms." Harper replied, her eyes meeting the attendant's in a plea for solidarity. The attendant nodded and slipped back behind the curtain, closing the door on the chilling cruelty that had just played out and on the quiet promise that one day kindness would prevail. Owen Sinclair pressed his cheek against the soft leather of the executive class seat, wiping his wet face on his sleeve. He glanced up at the small emergency card clipped to the seat back, a sterile diagram of life vests and oxygen masks that felt miles removed from his reality. At 4 years old, he was too small to understand most of what adults worried about. But he knew one thing for certain. This polished cabin of perfectly behaved grown-ups felt unbearably cruel. Alone in his pain, Owen turned his tear-streaked face toward Ms. Harper. "Can we go home now?" he asked, voice trembling. "Ms." Harper swallowed hard, tears glistening in her eyes. She knelt beside him, smoothing his blanket. "Not yet, sweetheart," she whispered, producing a juice box adorned with a playful penguin. "Here, maybe a sip of this will help." Owen accepted the box with shaky fingers, twisting the cap anxiously but never drinking. Instead, he stared down at the juice, as if its contents might somehow unlock the answer to why the world could be so unkind. Behind the velvet curtain, Charlotte Blake paused in her rounds. She straightened her posture, smoothed her skirt, and offered a crisp smile to the next first-class passenger. In her mind, she had done nothing wrong. She was guardian of order, protector of the refined realm beyond the divider. Children, like Owen, threatened that kingdom of calm, and she would not allow disruption on her watch. Back in executive class, Owen Sinclair lifted the torn paper and traced the jagged edges with a fingertip, imagining the plane in his drawing soaring free above every hardship. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, picturing his father watching over him somewhere high above the clouds. Somewhere, justice was gathering strength like a silent storm. As the plane sliced through the sky toward its destination, a promise took root in Owen's heart one day. Those broken pieces would be whole again. Around him, the cabin lights remained dimmed, but the glare of polite indifference shone brighter than any spotlight. Every passenger seemed absorbed in their lives, heads bent over devices, muted conversations drifting like distant murmurs. 2 rows ahead, an elderly couple clad in pearls whispered behind well-manicured hands. The woman tutted softly. "Children these days," she murmured. So entitled, her husband nodded sagely, adjusting his designer glasses. Neither saw the small boy whose heartbreak eclipsed their genteel critique. A few seats down, a man in a crisp gray suit scrolled through market charts on his tablet. He glanced up at Owen's soft sobs, then looked away without missing a beat. Moments later, he tapped out a note on his phone. Add unaccompanied minors clause to next policy update. His thumbs moved so fast it seemed as though he were carving the moment into corporate law. Closer still, a mother in a cashmere shawl offered her child a cookie while whispering, "Be quiet, sweetheart. There's nothing to see." She swept a tissue across her lips, murmuring about how only certain people belonged in first class. Her daughter nodded obediently, eyes wide, then turned back to her tablet, as if the sight of a scared boy had no place in their journey. Only the attendant who had offered Owen the juice earlier seemed to sense the injustice. She paused at the galley doorway, eyes lingering on his trembling shoulders, but duty kept her rooted. She straightened her apron and slipped back beyond the curtain, letting Charlotte Blake's measured footfalls take her place. No one spoke. No one intervened. Ms. Harper, seated beside Owen, felt each act of indifference like a physical blow. Passengers saw her as nothing more than a chaperone for a child in the wrong cabin, an annoyance. When she dared to clear her throat and quietly ask if anyone had a scrap of tape for the torn drawing, most shook their heads or mumbled apologies. A young banker leaned over with a solitary mint, as if that small gesture could erase the harm. Owen accepted it politely, but did not taste its sweetness. Instead, he folded the mint wrapper into a tiny square and placed it atop his drawing, as though by magic it might hold the pieces together. Daddy said, "People do the right thing," he whispered. His lip trembled, and a fresh tear rolled down his cheek. Ms. Harper tightened her cardigan around Owen, voice trembling with anger she would not show. "They're just busy," she murmured. "Sometimes people forget what it's like to be small." Her eyes flicked toward the curtain, wondering if Charlotte Blake would ever face a crowd that refused to look away. Behind the divider, muffled laughter drifted out Charlotte, basking in the praise of first-class colleagues. In that moment, Owen felt a surge of something powerful resolve. He sat up straighter, tugging Ms. Harper's sleeve and meeting her eyes with quiet determination. "Will Daddy make it stop?" he asked, clutching his torn fragments and the mint wrapper as though they were talismans. Ms. Harper swallowed, brushing Owen's hair from his forehead. She offered a small, sad smile. "He will," she promised. "I know he will." Outside the window, the plane drifted through a blanket of clouds under a perfect blue canvas. Inside, the mood had shifted from shock to a fragile empathy. Owen Sinclair pressed his hand to the glass, imagining a world vast enough to hold kindness for everyone. Even a small boy tucked in executive class. No one else offered comfort. Yet Owen felt a flicker of warmth from his guardian's promise. It was the spark that keeps hope alive when the world seems to have forgotten how to care. As the flight pressed on toward Emerald Cove, Owen vowed that one day he would stand up for those who had no one else to speak for them. For now, he leaned into the gentle rhythm of the cabin, bracing himself against the echoes of indifference and waiting for justice to take its silent flight. Owen Sinclair leaned heavily against Miss Harper's side, the soft lavender cinnamon scent of her cardigan wrapping around him like a fragile shield. Even that comforting aroma could not erase the ache in his chest. He pressed the torn halves of his drawing to his heart and closed his eyes, wishing desperately to will the world back into something that made sense. He remembered bedtime at home, Julian Sinclair tucking him in, brushing his hair aside, whispering, "You're safe, little man. I've got you." Those words had always been a promise. Now, high above the crystal sea, they felt distant, almost unreachable. How could Daddy keep that promise when the skies themselves threatened harm across the miles in a glass-walled office overlooking downtown Cedarwood City? Julian Sinclair stared at his laptop in stunned silence. A small red icon blinked in the corner of the screen, an emergency alert from the prototype smart bracelet he'd insisted on after last year's company retreat. It was supposed to monitor his son's vitals, not broadcast the sting of in-flight cruelty. Images flickered on his display. Owen's trembling finger tracing the torn paper. The tiny gasp as the first-class attendant struck a boy not yet 6 years old. Julian's chest tightened with anger and helplessness. Memories flooded back, late nights huddled over business plans in his parents' garage. The thrill of securing that first charter contract. The fear each time he pitched investors who doubted a young Indian American in Silicon Valley. Every triumph had hinged on grit and the conviction that fairness and dignity were not luxuries, but essentials. Now, his corporate code of conduct, crafted to protect employees and passengers alike, had been twisted against his own child. Julian's jaw clenched. He thought of Owen's brave face, shoulders drawn inward, eyes bright despite tears. Hope had burned in that small chest until it threatened to flicker out. Julian closed his eyes and inhaled the familiar hum of the city below, a far cry from the A350's engines. But it reminded him of something fundamental. His life and his airline were founded on the belief that right must triumph over might. He rose and walked to the window, palms flat against the cool glass. The bay shimmered under the afternoon sun, indifferent to the turmoil in his heart. He replayed the live feed once more, Owen's abandoned drawing drifting in the aisle, the harsh tilt of the attendant's hand, the hush that followed. He taught his son to stand tall, to help others, to fight injustice face to face, not endure it in silence. This was the moment to lead by example. Fingers trembling. Julian tapped the emergency override on his keyboard, a discreet command only the CEO could invoke. It would not blare through the cabin. It would whisper through the in-flight entertainment system, triggering the clear deck protocol he'd quietly embedded for crises. Then he would personally board the next flight and confront Charlotte Blake, armed with the weight of his responsibilities. His finger hovered over enter. He thought of Owen's soft voice, the small chin he'd tried so valiantly to hold high, and the shattered drawing still clutched in his hand. He remembered his own father's words, spoken 50 years ago. The world will knock you flat if you let it, but the measure of a man is how he picks himself up and how he protects those who cannot protect themselves. With that, Julian pressed enter. The code vanished from the screen, replaced by a muted green check mark. Instantly, high above the crystal sea, every monitor in both first and business class flickered. Justice would not arrive with fanfare or noise. It would settle in quietly, like a final chord bringing an entire symphony to stillness. Back in executive class, Owen Sinclair stirred at the soft glow of the overhead lights. His thumb traced the outline of the bracelet's rippled green band. Ms. Harper had drifted into a light doze, head lolling against the window. Owen opened his eyes and sensed something shifting. A calm began to bloom where fear had resided. The curtain at the front of the cabin quivered, as though caught in an unseen breeze. Owen did not yet understand what was unfolding, only that it would be bigger than torn paper or cold rules. He pressed a hand against his chest, right over his bracelet. It was meant to keep him safe, and in that moment, it pulsed warmly, a reminder that his father was watching, that cruelty would not go unchallenged. In the hush between engine roars, Owen felt a spark of resolve ignite within him. Courage, he now knew, did not always erupt in shouts. Sometimes it arrived on a whisper, a gentle gesture, or a father's voice carried across the sky. The cabin's low hum deepened into tense anticipation as passengers sifted through their seatback menus, eyes flicking up at sudden emptiness. One by one, every personal screen went dark. Movie trailers vanished. Flight progress bars blinked out. Even the hidden screens in first class faded to black. For a heartbeat, the entire aircraft held its breath. Then, in crisp, white Helvetica, the message appeared simultaneously above every head: Azure Skies Airlines, Incident Alert 3. Steady seconds of silence passed before the cabin lights dimmed further, as though under a conductor's baton. A soft click traveled through the overhead speakers. Then Julian Sinclair's voice, calm and resolute, filled each monitor's speaker. "Good afternoon. This is Julian Sinclair, CEO of Azure Skies Airlines. We apologize for the insensitive treatment that occurred on this flight. A 4-year-old passenger was subjected to both physical and emotional harm, effective immediately. This flight will be grounded upon arrival for a thorough investigation. We appreciate your cooperation as we uphold our commitment to safety, dignity, and respect for every traveler, especially our youngest." A collective intake of breath swept through the cabin. First class and business class alike fell into respectful silence. Charlotte Blake froze mid-aisle, service tray perched awkwardly in her hands. Her polished composure cracked as she stared at the monitor above the curtain, then toward the rows of passengers whose faces now reflected shock and solidarity. Owen Sinclair pressed his finger to the bracelet again, feeling its steady pulse. The torn, drawing fragments lay forgotten on his lap. He looked to Miss Harper, whose fingers tightened around his, her tears shining in the soft cabin glow. "Your daddy's voice," she whispered. Owen nodded, a small smile breaking through. Across the cabin, passengers rose in their seats, some offering nods of support, others murmuring encouragement. One ushered Charlotte Blake to the jump seat, a steward's quiet authority guiding her away from the aisle she once patrolled with arrogance. She sat, harnessed, as her peers watched her hurt expression a testament to accountability's weight. Through the monitor's feed, everyone saw what had happened: the swift motion, the tear, Owen's frightened gasp. No background music, no narrator, just raw reality laid bare. Passengers gasped as they recognized her gesture for what it was: cruelty that would not be tolerated. Owen Sinclair leaned back, folding his arms around himself, but this time his posture was steadier. He felt, at last, the presence of justice washing through the cabin. Julian's measured words had transformed the atmosphere. The polished arena of polite behavior had shifted into a space of collective empathy. As the plane glided toward its unscheduled landing, Owen's spark of resolve burned brighter than ever. Savvy business travelers and leisurely tourists alike felt it, nodding at one another in quiet agreement. Sometimes the smallest act of injustice demands the greatest courage, and sometimes that courage arrives on a silent ping from a child's bracelet and a father's unwavering promise. "Good afternoon," came Julian Sinclair's calm, authoritative voice over every speaker. "This is Julian Sinclair, CEO of Azure Skies Airlines. We apologize for the insensitive treatment that occurred on this flight. A 4-year-old passenger was subjected to both physical and emotional harm, effective immediately. This flight will be grounded upon arrival for a full investigation. Thank you for your patience as we uphold our commitment to safety and respect for every individual, especially our littlest travelers. In the galley doorway, Charlotte Blake froze mid-stride, a service tray awkwardly balanced in her hands. Her perfectly manicured nails turned pale against the metal rim. For the first time, she could not maintain her poise. She blinked at the monitor above the curtain, then glanced back at executive class, as though daring someone else to shoulder the blame. Heat crept up Charlotte's neck and spread across her cheeks. She tasted copper in her mouth. Her heart pounded so fiercely she feared it might crack her ribs. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, legs trembling as though anchored to the floor. All around her, passengers peered from behind seat backs, eyes wide in disbelief. A few executives in their wingback chairs exchanged incredulous glances, then straightened their ties and sat up as though Julian's words demanded a show of attention. Owen Sinclair, still clutching his torn drawing, pressed a finger to his glowing green bracelet. Warmth radiated from the device, a promise finally fulfilled. He felt powerful, safe, for the first time since boarding. The shattered sketch lay forgotten on his lap. He looked at Ms. Harper, whose fingers tightened protectively around his own. Tears shone in her eyes, but she managed a proud, trembling smile. "Your daddy's voice," she whispered, voice catching just enough for Owen to hear. "He's here for you," Ms. Harper added softly. Owen nodded and swallowed against the lump in his throat. A small smile flickered at the corner of his mouth, relief mingling with pride. Julian's message continued, measured and never rising in anger. "To the crew member responsible, we will be in touch. Rest assured, actions will be taken to address this breach of our standards. Our passengers deserve dignity and care, and Azure Skies Airlines will make this right." At that moment, Charlotte Blake's tray clattered to the floor, glass jars and napkins skittering across the aisle. The sharp crash shattered the tense silence. Heads turned toward the sound, eyes fixed on her. A fellow flight attendant rushed forward, but Charlotte waved her off, face pale and lips parted. She could not speak. Every protocol she once wielded felt like a shackle around her throat. The cabin door slid open, admitting a flood of natural light. For a heartbeat, the entire plane seemed suspended between sky and reality, where power spoke in whispers rather than roars. Passengers rose slowly, retrieving belongings with purposeful calm. Some laid gentle hands on Owen's small shoulders, murmuring words of encouragement. A mother in the front row placed a fresh sketch pad and box of crayons in his lap, an apology inked in kind gestures. Charlotte Blake stood motionless, staring at the monitors as if betrayed by her own reflection. She had built her career on polished routines and meticulous standards. Now she was naked before a silent tribunal, her cruelty broadcast in living color across every screen. Owen Sinclair closed his eyes and let Julian's presidential-like voice wash over him, each word a balm to his wounded heart. It was a promise pulsing through his veins. No act of adult cruelty would go unchallenged. He slid the blank sketch pad open, gently laying his lone remaining crayon atop the page. In that cabin, once cold and indifferent, warmth blossomed. Passengers whispered softly to one another. Overhead, bins clicked open to release extra blankets and warm drinks. Flight attendants moved with heartfelt softness, as though Julian's quiet command had realigned every heart on board, and high above the crystal sea, in the hush of the stratosphere, justice had truly arrived. not with a grand announcement, but with a single ping from a child's bracelet and a father's steadfast voice speaking for the voiceless. For Owen Sinclair. The twist was not just the words on the screen, but the knowledge that sometimes the smallest among us hold the greatest power, and that a promise kept in silence can resonate louder than any storm. Long after Julian Sinclair's voice faded, the cabin remained suspended in a stunned hush. Passengers sat motionless, heads turned toward darkened seatback screens as though afraid to blink. Executive class chairs and A350 Premier Suite alike held their occupants in a silent tableau. Silverware paused midway to lips, champagne glasses hovering under half-lifted brows. Even the gentle whoosh of the air vents felt unbearably loud in that stillness. Time itself seemed to have tilted, every soul on board attuned to the gravity of the moment. Eyes darted between monitors and one another, seeking context. A corporate attorney in seat 3C snapped his briefcase shut, eyes wide as though recalibrating his worldview. A retiree in pearls blinked until her vision cleared, then reached for her husband's hand, squeezing it with a tremble. A young executive murmured. Did that just happen beneath her breath? The words swallowed by the hush. Ripples of incredulous whispers spread like waves in a still pond. At the curtain's edge, flight attendants gathered, their professional composure cracking for the first time. One leaned against the bulkhead, jaw slack as she scrolled through her tablet to verify the alert. Another frowned, brows knitting in confusion as she tapped her in-ear receiver. Their usual choreography dissolved into raw uncertainty. They were strangers stranded in a moment they hadn't rehearsed. Across the aisle, Ms. Harper cradled Owen Sinclair in her lap, his eyes bright and unafraid. He pressed the torn drawing fragments to her cardigan, small body trembling with the aftershock of trauma and relief. Daddy spoke, he whispered, voice now thick with wonder instead of fear. Ms. Harper brushed his hair back and nodded. Yes, sweetheart. He did. Outside, the plane cut through acres of cloud under a perfect blue canvas. Inside, a new atmosphere reigned, one of collective empathy and fractured but mending hearts. In that charged silence, Owen Sinclair felt a seed of resolve take root. He traced the outline of his bracelet once more, remembering how his father had taught him to stand tall, to fight injustice, and to protect those who could not protect themselves. And here, high above the world, he knew that lesson would carry him far beyond any cabin's confines. Ms. Harper brushed Owen Sinclair's cheek with a fingertip, her eyes shimmering with relief. He did. Sweetheart, she murmured, drawing him closer. He's making sure you're safe. Owen nodded, burying his face against her shoulder, and for the first time let a shaky sigh escape. Meanwhile, Charlotte Blake hovered near the galley doorway, her once pristine uniform suddenly feeling as constricting as the burden of her shame. She stared at the nearest monitor, its dark screen reflecting a ghostly image of her own face. In first class, guests whispered and watched, some with sympathetic eyes, others with cold disdain. The seamless world of protocol and privilege she had crafted lay fractured by a single, silent ping from Owen's bracelet. In the cockpit, the captain's calm voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. We will be diverted to the nearest airport for an unscheduled stop and investigation. We apologize for the inconvenience and appreciate your cooperation." His words, gentle as they were, stretched through every row, transforming confusion into acceptance. A veteran flight attendant moved serenely through the cabin, offering tissues and quiet reassurance. She paused at each seat, her steady presence a salve to wounded spirits. "We'll get through this," she murmured, her voice low but firm. Passengers returned her nods, grateful for her steady kindness. Even the most aloof business traveler tucked away his laptop and watched the attendant's compassionate eyes rather than his screen. Side conversations began to bud genuine, hushed exchanges about the cruelty they had witnessed. An elderly woman reached into her purse and produced her frequent flyer compliment slip. "Here, dear," she whispered to Owen Sinclair. "Use this to draw me a picture. I have plenty of pencils." Owen's face brightened, a flicker of hope igniting in his chest. Across the aisle, a father bent down to his daughter. "See, honey," he said softly, "sometimes you have to stand up when things aren't fair." His words planted a seed of courage in more than one heart. The quiet intervention of Julian Sinclair's voice had blossomed into collective empathy. Blankets and warm drinks circulated freely. Passengers murmured words of support for the small boy. What began as a solitary act of kindness had rippled outward, uniting strangers in defense of the vulnerable. Owen Sinclair sat curled in his window seat, thumb resting lightly on his green bracelet. Its glow had faded, its purpose fulfilled. The cabin had come alive with compassion long before the landing gear touched down. In that charged silence, Julian's quiet promise did more than ground a plane. It bound disparate hearts together around a shared conviction that cruelty would not stand unchallenged. As the azure skies Airbus A350 descended toward its emergency landing, a subtle warmth filled the cabin. It was not the glow of service lights or the hum of the electronics, but the hush of understanding that justice, once awakened, moves swiftly and surely even when it begins with a single, silent ping. Then the monitors sprang back to life, displaying a grainy but unmistakable video clip. Every screen, both in first class and executive class, replayed the moment Charlotte Blake's hand struck Owen Sinclair's cheek. The clear image of his startled face and her swift motion looped again and again, each frame a shard of broken trust. Charlotte froze in the galley doorway as the cabin's collective breath caught in their throats. Her neatly pinned hair seemed to wilt under the glare of her own actions played out in public view. The hush that followed deepened into a palpable intake of breath. Across the ocean in his Palo Alto office, Julian Sinclair's heart clenched at the sight of his son's pain. Yet his expression softened with fierce tenderness. He recognized that same look of shock mirrored on his own face years ago when he first realized power's true measure lay not in might, but in protecting those who could not protect themselves. In the cabin, passengers gasped. Some braced themselves against seat backs, as though readying for impact. A silver-haired businessman in seat 2A raised a trembling finger and replayed the clip, refusing to look away. A woman in pearls stared until tears pooled at her lashes. There was no music, no narrator, only the raw reality of a child's anguish laid bare for all to see. Charlotte Blake's breath hitched. She took a trembling step backward, heels clicking in faltering rhythm. I didn't know," she stammered, voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." Her hand flew to her throat as though to staunch an invisible wound. A steward approached her gently. "Ms. Blake, please follow me to the jump seat." There was no harshness in his tone, only a quiet authority. Charlotte's shoulders sagged as she nodded, wiping a tear with the back of her hand. Each step she took down the aisle was measured, as if she feared the ground might give way beneath her. Julian Sinclair watched her from the video feed, his stern gaze softening into something almost sorrowful. He understood people make mistakes, sometimes devastating ones, but accountability remained the only path forward. With a small, imperceptible gesture, he signaled his own unspoken promise. Punishment here would be tempered by justice, not vengeance. As Charlotte Blake settled into the jump seat, a hush fell so deep that the engine's hum sounded like thunder in a canyon. The steward clicked her harness into place, and Charlotte lowered her head, allowing the weight of every eye in the cabin to settle on her. Behind her, the monitors cycled through close-ups of Owen Sinclair's tear-filled eyes, the shock etched on his cheek. The moment his hand flew to his face, the screens displayed each frame like fragments of fractured trust. Some passengers turned away in protest. Most watched in grim fascination. Owen sat locked in Ms. Harper's arms, clutching a fresh sketch pad, but he did not dare draw. He simply watched Charlotte's retreat, confusion and pity mingling on his small face. He leaned against Ms. Harper. She looked scared. He whispered, "Ms." Harper drew him closer. "Yes, honey. She does." The cabin remained suspended in that unspoken moment, a silent tableau where privilege and cruelty were hurled into stark relief. Yet, with each tremor of compassion circulating through the rows, a quiet revolution took shape, a vow to protect the smallest, no matter where they sit. High above the crystal sea, the azure skies, Airbus A350 continued its path toward an unscheduled descent, carrying not only souls in transit, but the promise that justice, born from a father's quiet resolve, could echo louder than any storm. "Ms." Harper brushed Owen Sinclair's cheek with a fingertip, her eyes glistening with relieved pride. "He did, sweetheart," she murmured, drawing him closer. "He's making sure you're safe." Owen nodded, pressing a thumb to his lips, then looked out at the gentle expanse of clouds, feeling the soft cabin lights wash over him. A moment later, the captain's calm voice crackled over the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate your patience. This flight will be diverting to the nearest airport for disembarkation and a full investigation. We apologize for any inconvenience and thank you for your cooperation." His words, measured and impersonal, nonetheless felt like the final punctuation on a day of drama and distress. Passengers stirred, gathering belongings with a renewed sense of camaraderie born from shared outrage. Whispers flitted down the aisle's offers to help Charlotte Blake gather her things, gentle admonitions to set things right, and gratitude that Julian Sinclair had intervened. Even a few reached out to Charlotte as she unbuckled her jump seat harness. An elderly woman laid a comforting hand on her arm and murmured, "We all make mistakes. Let's fix this together." From his jump seat, Charlotte Blake watched Owen Sinclair climb into Julian Sinclair's lap, pressing his cheek against his father's chest. The small, jagged sketch pad fell forgotten at their feet. Julian kissed the top of his son's head. "You were so brave," he whispered. Owen wrapped his arms around Julian's neck, closing his eyes in relief. Tears streamed silently down Charlotte's face as she reached into her pocket and lifted her ID badge in trembling admission. I deserve this," she said, voice barely above a whisper. In those few words lay the first seeds of redemption and acceptance of responsibility that strictest policies alone could not demand. As the plane began its slow descent, a collective hope filled the cabin. In that moment of reckoning, it was not only a child's innocence restored, but a powerful reminder that even small acts of cruelty can be checked by a single authoritative voice. Owen Sinclair opened his eyes to the soft glow of the returning service lights. Strangers offered him approving nods, acknowledging the simple power of compassion embodied by a 4-year-old. In their shared glance, Owen found the truest reward, the knowledge that right, no matter how quietly delivered, would always echo louder than any act of cruelty. The Airbus touched down on the tarmac of the diverted airport, its landing wheels kissing the runway like the final chord of a symphony. Over the intercom, the captain announced, "We are now diverting to Miami International Airport for an immediate safety and conduct investigation. Thank you for your patience." A collective exhale rippled through the cabin, relief tinged with excitement that justice would play out before their eyes. As the doors opened to warm Florida air, ground staff in crisp uniforms boarded swiftly. One handed a press release to the purser, who passed it down the aisle. A flight attendant moved with purpose, clearing her throat on behalf of Azure Skies Airlines. "We sincerely apologize for the distressing incident involving one of our youngest passengers. Effective immediately. Ms. Charlotte Blake has been placed on administrative leave pending a full, transparent investigation. We reaffirm our commitment to ensuring safety, dignity, and respect for every traveler." Her voice was professional and firm, carrying the weight of accountability. Julian Sinclair rose from his seat and guided Owen Sinclair toward the cabin door. A soft round of applause followed them down the aisle, first tentative, then swelling into genuine appreciation. Even the most aloof business travelers straightened their suits and nodded in respect. A flight attendant paused by Owen and handed him a fresh sketch pad and a small box of crayons, a gesture of solidarity and new beginnings. Owen gripped them tightly, hope flickering in his eyes. On the tarmac, cameras flashed as reporters and ground crews assembled. A PR manager guided Julian Sinclair and Owen Sinclair to a branded podium beside the jetway. Family photographers clicked rapidly, capturing the moment when a CEO reunited with his son, navy suit slightly undone in solidarity with his boy's disheveled hair. Julian Sinclair knelt to Owen's level, brushing a crumb of cookie from his son's cheek. "You okay, champ?" he asked softly. Owen nodded. "Did Daddy make it stop?" he asked, voice hopeful. Julian placed a reassuring hand on Owen's back. "I did, and we're going to make this right," he promised, then rose to face the assembled crowd. "Good afternoon," he began, voice steady. "I'm Julian Sinclair, CEO of Azure Skies Airlines. Today, our airline fell short of the highest standards of service and care. The incident involving my son was unacceptable, and I take full responsibility. We have engaged a third-party investigator for a swift and thorough review of our policies and personnel actions. Ms. Blake has been placed on leave pending that review, and we are redoubling our training programs to ensure this never happens again." His gaze swept the crowd, journalists, ground staff, fellow passengers before settling on Owen, who peered back with earnest eyes. Julian smiled, pride and relief mingling in his expression. "And to my boy," he added, bending slightly, "thank you for your courage." Owen Sinclair lifted his crayon box like a medal, offering a shy wave to the cameras. Reporters shouted questions, legal consequences, policy changes, restoring public trust, but Julian Sinclair answered each with composed candor, promising transparency, improved child safety measures, and accountability at every level. As the formalities concluded, Ms. Harper handed Owen a sealed envelope, a personalized apology note from Charlotte Blake, written at the airline's request. Owen folded the letter gently and tucked it into his new sketch pad, eyes bright with empathy. Inside the waiting SUV, Julian Sinclair held Owen Sinclair close. "Can we go home now?" Owen asked softly. "Almost, buddy," Julian replied, pulling away from the podium. "First, we make sure everyone learns from today, then we go home together." He ruffled Owen's hair and started the engine. As the SUV rolled away, leaving the diverted flight behind, a sense of justice hung in the warm Miami air. A global news cycle had begun, internal memos dispatched, policy reviews launched, a public promise etched in both apology and action. In the quiet of the car, Owen Sinclair perched on his father's lap, crayons at the ready. "Daddy," he said, voice earnest, "can I draw you another picture?" Julian Sinclair smiled, reaching into his jacket for a fresh sheet of paper. "Only if you promise to keep it safe for both of us," he replied. Owen giggled, settling into his father's arms. Outside, the Miami sun dipped low, painting the sky in hopeful hues, and high above the world they left behind. The gentle echo of compassion promised that even the smallest voice could transform an entire cabin, and that true leadership whispered first to the hearts of the harmed. "And to my boy," Julian Sinclair added, bending to meet his son's eye. "Thank you for being brave." Owen Sinclair's grin was small but triumphant as he lifted his fresh crayon box like a medal. Reporters' questions erupted around them. Will Charlotte Blake face legal charges? How will Azure Skies support affected travelers? What new steps will you take to restore public trust? Each query landed at Julian's feet, and he answered with composed candor promises of transparency, protocol improvements, and enhanced child safety training that would ripple through every level of the airline. His voice carried both authority and genuine remorse, the quiet power his passengers had come to know. As camera flashes stuttered, Ms. Harper approached, offering Owen a sealed envelope, Charlotte Blake's personal apology, penned at the company's request. With empathy shining in his eyes, Owen folded the note carefully and tucked it into his sketch pad. Then, emboldened, he offered a shy wave to the crowd. When the formalities concluded, Julian Sinclair swept Owen Sinclair into his arms and led him toward the waiting SUV. Inside, Owen cast one last glance at the jet's cabin, its plush seats and polished aisles forever etched in his memory. "Can we go home now?" he asked softly. "Almost, buddy," Julian replied, ruffling Owen's hair. "First, we make sure everyone learns from today. Then we head home together." As the SUV pulled away, the warm Miami air embraced them. The swift public reversal had proved that sometimes the quietest decisions echo the loudest, and that true leadership is measured by how fiercely one protects the smallest among us. By the time Julian Sinclair and Owen Sinclair arrived at Azure Skies headquarters, the incident had exploded across every channel. Internal memos landed in employee inboxes within minutes, effective immediately. Charlotte Blake was terminated for code of conduct violations, and a comprehensive child safety review was underway. Outside, social media buzzed with loops of the cabin footage, trending outrage and sympathy in equal measure. In a makeshift media center, Julian Sinclair returned to the podium under bright lights. "We failed one of our youngest passengers," he began, voice taut yet sincere. That mistake will never be repeated. Behind him, a banner unfurled azure skies child-safe havens, because every traveler deserves respect. Back in the arrival hall, Owen Sinclair sat curled at his father's side, clutching his sketch pad. When Julian Sinclair rejoined him, he enveloped his son in a fierce hug. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that," he whispered. Owen pressed his cheek against his father's chest. "It's okay. Daddy, they made it right." Ground staff handed out brochures announcing the new Family Care Suite pilot program, age-segmented areas with trained attendants, sensory-friendly lighting, and guaranteed adult-to-child ratios. News outlets praised the initiative as a model for every major carrier. Meanwhile, HR escorted Charlotte Blake away in a discreet vehicle, accompanied by a message of both accountability and compassion support for employees in crisis, but zero tolerance for cruelty, on the drive back to their home in Cedarwood City. Julian Sinclair held Owen Sinclair's hand, glancing down at the now quiet green bracelet on his wrist. He thought ahead to rebuilding trust with families, retraining crews, and weaving empathy into every flight. Most of all, he dreamed of restoring the sky as a place of wonder, not fear, for his son. "Daddy," Owen said earnestly as the city lights emerged, "can I draw you another picture?" Julian smiled and produced a fresh sheet of paper from his jacket pocket. "Only if you promise to keep it safe for both of us," he replied. Owen Sinclair giggled as he settled into his father's lap, crayons at the ready. As night fell, Azure Skies Flight 904 taxied toward the runway for their first family trip since Miami. Owen settled into the same cream leather seat that had once been his battleground, resting his small hand on his father's shoulder. No curt dismissals today, only the gentle hum of anticipation and the soft clink of crystal water glasses. Passengers whispered warmly, their eyes reflecting shared empathy rather than indifference. Julian Sinclair leaned forward, brushing a loose strand of hair from Owen's forehead. "Ready for takeoff, buddy?" he asked. Owen Sinclair nodded, a confident smile lighting his face. He pressed his cheek against the window, watching runway lights trail past like comets. "I think I like this seat," he said, patting the cushion. "Can we draw now?" "Absolutely," Julian replied, handing him a fresh sketch pad. "Draw anything you want." Owen's eyes sparkled as he clicked open a new box of crayons, reds, blues, greens, each shade a promise of possibility. A gentle chime announced the captain's voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, we will be taking off shortly. Please fasten your seat belts." The announcement passed like a lullaby, and Julian Sinclair secured his belt before tugging Owen close for a quick pre-flight hug. Outside, the engines roared to life, the aircraft accelerated, the world beyond that window blurring into a stream of city lights. Inside, there was no trace of that afternoon's scandal, no shadow of the storm. Instead, every smile, every nod felt like the lasting residue of a steely compassion that had prevailed. As they lifted into the night sky, Owen Sinclair began sketching a new airplane, its wings outstretched over cartoon clouds. Above, tiny letters spelled "Azure Skies Where Everyone Belongs." Julian watched Owen, pride swelling in his chest. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft blue, and a hush fell over the passengers, an appreciative silence carrying the thrill of soaring free. Father and son leaned their heads together, watching the world slip away. In that serene moment, they understood a simple truth. power did not always roar. Sometimes it whispered through a single act of compassion, echoing in every heart it touched. And though skies would forever hold turbulence, their silent promise to protect kindness above all would guide them home, wherever they soared next. As our story touches down, we leave you with more than just headlines of a slap heard round the cabin. We witness how one small boy's courage and one father's steady voice can transform an entire airline's heart. From Owen Sinclair's torn drawing to Julian Sinclair's silent override. This isn't just a tale of policy change. It's a testament to the power of empathy, accountability, and the promise that even the smallest passengers deserve respect. What echoes most isn't the engine's hum, but the murmur of passengers united in compassion. It's the memory of a CEO crouching to hug his son, a flight attendant acknowledging her mistake, and a cabin reborn in solidarity. We're reminded that leadership isn't measured by authority alone, but by how fiercely we protect the vulnerable. If this story moved you, please give it a thumbs up, share it with your community, and subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge us to stand up for what's right. Your support helps us keep these voices and these lessons alive. Until next time, remember sometimes the quietest ping sparks the greatest change.